The potatoes were half peeled when I first saw the car pull up. Rebecca stepped out in that pale yellow dress she used to wear only for Easter. She looked good, tired but good, holding a cake tin with her elbows tight so it wouldn't tip. I paused, the peeler still in my hand, and wiped my fingers on the hem of my apron. Not for mess, just to steady them. Then came Linda's car, and Grace's little green one with the cracked side mirror. They all started piling in like it was Sunday at my house again. But no one was bringing a casserole dish inside for me. I leaned closer to the window, careful not to let the curtain move too much. The wind had a soft bite that day. You could smell summer giving way to fall, grass turning dry, the sky a paler kind of blue. I heard laughter, the kind that bubbles up when people don't know they're being watched. It wasn't the baby shower that stung, not exactly. It was the forgetting. Lisa and I used to make cinnamon rolls every winter break. She'd sit on the counter with flour in her eyebrows, asking if babies could dream in the womb. I told her yes, that's why we sing lullabies. Now she was having a baby of her own, and the woman who sang her lullabies didn't make the guest list. I sat at the kitchen table and turned the radio down low. The old clock ticked like it always did. Even clocks know how to keep going when no one listens. I told myself maybe it was an oversight, or maybe they thought I wouldn't want to come. But I saw the extra chairs. I saw how Linda parked behind the hedge so no one on the street would block the drive. This was planned, and I wasn't in it. Around noon, I went to the linen closet and pulled out the quilt I made for Lisa. Tiny sheep and stars, hand-stitched in soft gray and sky blue. I remembered sewing it by the window, my hands swollen from arthritis, pushing every needle through like a prayer. She once said it was her favorite thing in the whole world. She'd drag it to every sleepover until it frayed at the corners. I pressed it against my chest that day, in that quiet hallway. Funny how cloth can still carry warmth, even after all the arms that held it have let go. I thought about walking it over, maybe just dropping it off on the porch with a note, but I didn't want to be some memory left on the steps, so I folded it gently and put it back. Sometimes dignity is just choosing not to knock. Around 2:30, I made tea, chamomile with too much honey, just how I used to make it for Lisa when her throat hurt or her heart was sore from school. From the window, I saw her open a gift and hold up a tiny pink onesie. Everyone clapped. Rebecca wiped away a tear, Grace took pictures, and Lisa smiled like she was already someone's mother. Not my grandbaby anymore, not my girl with the skinned knees and bedtime fears, but a woman now, growing something of her own. I took a sip of tea. It burned a little, but I didn't flinch. They don't mean to forget, you know. They just start building their own lives, and the hands that once held them become part of the wallpaper. There, but not really seen. By evening, the cars began to pull away. Balloons drifted on the porch, streamers fluttered like old wishes caught in wind. No one thought to stop by. No one brought me leftovers, and I didn't expect them to. I finished peeling the rest of the potatoes, made a small pot of stew, enough for one. I left an extra bowl out anyway. Habit, I guess, or hope. That night, I sat in my room with the window cracked open, listening to the quiet. It wasn't angry silence, just the kind that settles in when the house remembers no one is coming by. And I wondered if one day Lisa's baby might ask her who made that faded quilt in the back of the closet. If maybe she'll say my name. If maybe, that's enough. It was a clear morning, the kind where the sky feels too bright for what you're carrying inside. I wore the beige sari with the lace trim, the one I'd saved for something special. I'd ironed it the night before, laying it out flat like it was sacred. The blouse pinched a little under the arms, but I told myself not to fuss. Mothers aren't supposed to outshine their sons, not on days like this. Jeremy had asked me not to say anything during the ceremony. Just be present, Ma. Please, I've got a speech and a few interviews. Just let me handle it. His voice was gentle, but firm in that way he'd picked up over the years. From courtrooms, maybe, or maybe just from being a man in a world that rewards control. So I nodded, smiled, pressed my lips together, and practiced the kind of silence that doesn't echo back. We stood outside the courthouse steps while the photographer fussed with the angle of light. Jeremy stood tall, adjusting his cufflinks, his tie just slightly askew. He looked handsome, like his father once did, when the world still believed in him. Linda was there too, of course. She held Jeremy's arm like a badge. Her makeup was soft but flawless, and her heels clicked like she owned the concrete. She didn't ask me to stand beside them for photos. I wasn't even sure she saw me at all. They'd rented a car, a sleek, dark one with leather seats that smelled like a place I didn't belong. When Jeremy opened the door for me, I paused for a second longer than I should have. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to remind myself how to fold my dignity into small spaces. Inside the hall, there were rows of folding chairs and a banner with gold lettering, "From Son of Immigrants to Defender of Justice." Someone leaned over and asked, "Which one's his mother?" Another whispered, "She must be proud." And I was. But pride, like most things in my life, was threaded with sacrifice. I remembered the day I sold my wedding bangles, 22-karat gold, engraved with vines and lotus petals, a gift from my mother, passed to me with a trembling smile. I took them to Mr. Khan's shop in the market, unwrapped them from tissue, and set them on the glass counter. He didn't ask why. That money paid Jeremy's first semester fees, the books, the hostel, even his train ticket. He never asked where it came from. He just kissed my forehead and said, "I won't waste it, Ma." And he didn't. He worked hard. He made something of himself. But somewhere along the way, I became part of the foundation, not the frame. During his speech, he thanked his mentors, his professors, even a neighbor from their first apartment in the city. He didn't mention me. I told myself it was nerves, or maybe time limits, or maybe I was meant to understand without being told. Afterward, I stood near the refreshment table, holding a cup of tea gone cold. A young woman came over, maybe a junior associate or a friend from his law firm. She smiled politely and asked if I needed anything. I wanted to ask for nothing, but I said, "Napkins," just to feel the sound of my own voice. When the event ended, Jeremy hugged me quickly, too quickly, and said, "You okay, Ma?" I nodded. Of course I did. That's what mothers do. On the way out, I saw a little boy with chocolate smeared on his face, tugging at his mother's sleeve. She bent low and wiped it with the corner of her dupatta. That soft, instinctive gesture. I remember doing the same to Jeremy once, 100 times. Now he wiped his own face with monogrammed handkerchiefs. We drove home mostly in silence. He scrolled through his phone, chuckling once at a message. I watched the trees blur past the window, yellow leaves falling like reminders. He dropped me at my gate, kissed my cheek, and said, "Thanks for coming," as if I were a guest. I stood at the porch for a long time after the car left, holding my bag close to my side. Inside, the house was still. No voices, no gold bangles clinking in the drawer, just glass ones, cool and quiet. I poured myself another cup of tea, reheated it twice. It still tasted like waiting. They left in a huff, Grace with her arms folded, Jeremy muttering under his breath, and Linda pretending to clean the kitchen just to avoid eye contact. "You need to decide, Ma," Grace had said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It's not fair to leave things up in the air," Jeremy added, as if I were already fading. And just like that, they were gone. No kiss on the cheek, no offer to help with the dishes, not even a wave goodbye. Only the echo of their voices hung around, clinging to the curtains like smoke. I sat for a while at the kitchen table, the light from the windows slipping slowly across the floorboards. It was that late afternoon kind of light, soft and sideways, the kind that makes everything look like a memory. They thought I had nothing to say. They thought I didn't know what was mine. I waited till I heard the last car engine fade down the hill. Then I got up, quietly, like I was stepping into a secret. My knees ached a little, but that's the tax age charges for remembering too much. In the pantry, behind the old tea tins and empty jam jars, sat a rusted flour tin. Not the new kind with polished chrome and fancy labels. This one was dented on the side, the lid worn smooth from decades of being opened by hands that fed generations. I hadn't opened it in years. I don't bake anymore. Not since Harold died. Not since the kids started buying cakes instead of coming over for them. I pulled it down carefully, brushing off a little dust with the corner of my sleeve. The tin still smelled faintly of vanilla and cloves, like every warm Sunday we used to have. Inside, beneath a yellowed recipe card and an old photo of Rebecca with a toothless grin, was the deed. Thick paper, crisp edges, dated 1979, signed by Harold and me in blue ink. Back then, we barely had a cent to our name, but we had that land. The house, the orchard, the little patch of garden Harold swore would never grow anything, and then cried the day his first tomato sprouted. I remember the day we bought it. Harold came home with a smile so wide I thought he'd won the lottery. "We got it," he said. "Ours. All of it." We danced in the kitchen that night, flour on our sleeves, laughing like fools. And then we put the deed in the flour tin, not because we didn't have a drawer, but because Harold said, "No one ever checks where women keep their secrets." And he was right. I sat down at the table and ran my fingers over the names. Mine. His. No one else's. No mention of Grace. No clause for Jeremy. No fine print tying it to any of their mortgages or marriages. It was ours. And now they wanted to divide it like it was cake. Earlier that day, Grace had said, "Well, you're not really using the orchard anymore." And Jeremy joked, "I mean, Mom, do you even go upstairs these days?" They laughed, and I laughed too, politely. But inside, something stiffened. They forget that I planted every one of those apple trees with my bare hands, that I once scrubbed that staircase until it shone, even while my back screamed and Rebecca clung to my hip, teething. They see old wood and overgrown hedges. I see birthday banners, rain on the tin roof, Harold's muddy boots by the door, and Rebecca learning to walk across that living room floor like the world was steady. I held the deed in both hands, like a memory that could still be protected. It wasn't about the property, it was about the promise. They think it's theirs to take, but they forgot who kept it safe, who paid the taxes, who patched the leaking roof when no one else even called. I slipped the document back into the tin, sealed it, and placed it high on the top shelf again. Not to hide it, but to remind myself, just because they speak louder doesn't mean they know more. And just because I've grown quiet doesn't mean I've forgotten what I built. That night, I made myself a cup of tea, 2 spoons of sugar, just how Harold liked it. The wind outside was gentle, rustling the apple trees like they remembered him. I sat by the window, sipping slowly, the flour tin resting on my lap. Heavy with paper, yes, but heavier still with history. I'd just made tea, one of those slow afternoons where the house hums with old quiet, the kind that carries creaks in the floorboards and birdsong through cracked windows. I had the kettle on, and Nancy was on the couch, tapping away at her phone like she always does. She thinks I don't notice, but I notice everything now. She didn't even glance up when I brought in the tray, just said, "Thanks, Mom," like it was part of the furniture routine, like the cups and spoons floated there by themselves. She made the call not 5 feet from where I sat. "I'll just take it here," she said, waving her hand absently, as if I were part of the wallpaper. She thought I couldn't hear. Maybe she thought I wouldn't understand. Or maybe she simply didn't care. I didn't sip the tea right away. I stirred it, slow, like I had all the time in the world. And I listened. She dialed Lisa. Her voice softened, the way it always does when she's talking to someone she wants something from. "Yeah, no, she's fine," she said, "just sitting here." She doesn't really say much these days. I almost smiled at that. I've been saying less, it's true, but it's not because I have nothing to say. It's because I've learned that silence is a sharper knife, one they never see coming. Then came the words, the ones I wasn't supposed to hear. "I just need Mom to stay quiet through this," she said. Pause. "Once it's ours, we'll figure out what to do with her." She laughed. Not loud, just a soft, breathy kind of laugh, like this was all some mildly inconvenient paperwork. My hand didn't shake. I kept stirring, sugar slowly dissolving in the cup. The clink of the spoon against the porcelain was the only answer I gave. I heard Lisa's voice faintly through the phone. She was agreeing. "They're getting older. It's better if we settle this now," she said. Settle what? I'm not a piece of land. I'm not an attic full of furniture. I'm not a deed waiting for a signature. I am a woman, a mother, a keeper of every scraped knee, every school form, every midnight call for help. But to them, I'm a silence to manage. Nancy ended the call with, "We'll talk more Sunday," and then scrolled through something on her screen. She still didn't look at me. Maybe she forgot I was even there. I finally took a sip of tea. It had gone lukewarm. Not bad, just not what I'd hoped it would be. I wanted to speak, to say her name, to ask her how she forgot who fed her through every fever and fear. But I didn't. Some things don't deserve the dignity of your voice. Instead, I stood up, quietly, like the old floorboards taught me how. I carried my cup to the sink and rinsed it under the tap. Then I walked to the hallway, into my bedroom, and closed the door behind me. No slam, no drama, just the sound of a woman refusing to perform her pain. Inside the closet, on the top shelf, there's a folder Nancy doesn't know about. It has my will, my letters, my choices. The house isn't going to them. Not the orchard, not the garden, not the crooked front steps they used to run down barefoot on summer evenings. No, it's going to someone who brings me tea without expecting thanks. To someone who once asked me how I was and actually waited for the answer. To someone who never asked for the house, and for that reason alone, deserves it. They want to figure out what to do with me, as if I'm a task, an object, a placeholder until the paperwork clears. But I've already figured out what to do with them. And I'm not angry. I've lived long enough to know what anger costs. I'm just done. Later that night, Nancy knocked gently and asked if I wanted anything. I smiled. "No, dear, I'm fine." She smiled back. Polite, practiced. She never asked what I'd heard, and I never told her. I found it on a quiet morning, the kind with a gray sky and the smell of damp earth through the windows. The house was still, not peaceful, just paused, like it was holding its breath. I was sorting through the old records, mostly for something to do. The flour tin had already given up one secret, and I wondered what else time had hidden from them, or from me. That's when I opened the brown envelope marked Land Records, 1984. It crackled at the edges like old bread, but inside the paper was still firm. And there it was, my name. Not scribbled in margin notes, not penciled in beside Harold's with a question mark. No, signed, witnessed, notarized. Joint title holder, Mr. Harold Joseph and Mrs. Evelyn Joseph. They never said it that way. To them, it was always Dad's land, Harold's orchard, even after he passed. Jeremy kept calling it his father's legacy, as if I hadn't pruned every tree in that orchard with my own hands, as if I hadn't pulled weeds with a baby on my hip and sweat dripping into my eyes while Harold worked overtime in the city. But Harold, quiet, steady Harold, had known. He'd seen. He was not a man who said much, but he was a man who paid attention. When we went to the notary all those years ago, I remember how he turned to me with that serious look, the one that always meant something was about to matter. "I want your name on it too, Evie," he said. "You built this with me." I didn't fight him on it. I didn't feel I had to. We were still young enough to believe in fairness, and old enough to know how rare it was. Now, decades later, that ink, faded but unbroken, felt like a whisper from the past. You were never just standing beside me. The kids never cared to look through the old records. Too boring, too technical, Jeremy said. Let's just get a lawyer to sort it all out. Grace muttered something about probate like it was a foreign language she didn't plan on learning. They never asked what I signed, what I owned, what I still own. Nancy once told her husband that Mom never had much of a head for finances. She said it kindly, with a smile, while I was refilling the gravy boat. But here it was, proof I had not just a head, but a hand in every decision. Harold may have spoken less than me, but when he made a choice, it stayed made. I held the document for a long time, ran my finger over the lettering. My signature was different back then, more loops, more confidence in the tail of the Y. Funny how you can forget the shape of your own name. A breeze came through the window just then, fluttering the edge of the page. The apple trees were swaying outside, tall and full. The orchard hadn't given fruit in 2 seasons, but I still trimmed the lower branches, out of habit. Some things deserve to be tended, even when they stop giving back. I placed the deed on the table and poured myself a cup of tea. No sugar this time, just the bitterness, clean and honest. I looked over at the chair where Harold used to sit, always with one hand resting on the table like he was anchoring it. "You thought of everything," I whispered. And maybe he heard me, or maybe the wind carried it down the hall. The children had been circling like vultures lately. Grace sent a message last week asking if I'd had the property evaluated. Jeremy wanted to talk options. Nancy kept bringing up retirement homes, and not in a gentle way. They assumed this house was theirs, that I was just a placeholder, a soft-voiced gatekeeper standing between them and their inheritance. But I wasn't holding the gate. I owned the gate. And now I had the proof. Not in a drawer, not in a story they could dismiss, but in black and white, notarized by a man long gone and trusted by the one who mattered. I thought about framing it, just to watch their faces. But no, I wouldn't make a spectacle of it. That's not the kind of woman I am. Instead, I folded it neatly, slipped it into a new plastic sleeve, tucked it into a folder labeled in my handwriting, Legal, Evelyn Joseph. Let them argue. Let them plan. Let them whisper behind doors and pretend I don't hear. Because when the time comes, and it will, I will speak. Not loudly, not cruelly, just clearly. And I'll show them what it means to read the fine print. The courthouse smelled of floor polish and nerves, too clean, too cold, like a place where no one was meant to feel at home. I sat on the second bench from the front, hands folded in my lap, ankles crossed the way my mother taught me. My dress was pale blue, one I'd ironed myself the night before. A little loose at the waist now. I'd lost weight lately, but no one asked why. They only notice when you're not there at all. But that morning, I was exactly where I needed to be. Jeremy was near the front with his lawyer, all crisp collars and hushed tones. He didn't look back, not once. He'd texted me 2 nights ago. "Just be there, Ma. No need to speak. Your presence helps." That word again, presence, like I was incense or wallpaper, useful but only in the background. I said nothing in return, just pressed my sari and polished my shoes until the leather gave off a soft, dull shine. The case wasn't complicated, at least not for them. A matter of land division, transfer of ownership, something to resolve before the next tax cycle, as Jeremy put it. He said it with the ease of a man who'd never missed a bill because he'd chosen groceries instead. Grace and Nancy sat on the other side of the room. Nancy wore pearls. Grace clutched a folder to her chest like a shield. They didn't smile when I walked in, just nodded, quick, obligatory. I took my seat and watched the dust float in the air like lazy thoughts. The judge was a small woman with kind eyes. She adjusted her glasses and asked Jeremy to begin. He spoke well. He always does. All those years in law school paid off. My bangles did that, remember? Sold to a man named Arif in a shop that didn't take cards. But Jeremy never liked talking about where the money came from, only where it took him. "We're seeking clarification regarding the ownership of the property following the death of Mr. Harold Joseph," he said. "Our mother is in agreement with the transfer of management responsibilities." Our mother? Agreement? I sat up a little straighter. No one had asked me that. The judge glanced toward me. "Mrs. Joseph, do you have anything to add?" Jeremy's head tilted slightly, but he didn't turn. A pause stretched across the room like held breath. I smiled gently and shook my head. Not yet. Presence, remember? The legal team continued, referencing past tax records, maintenance expenses, market value. They passed around documents with staples and signatures and confidence, but they didn't have the one that mattered. It was in my bag, folded 3 times, neatly, carefully, the way Harold and I always did things. I could feel it there, heavy as a heartbeat. At recess, Jeremy came over, smiled like a stranger. "Ma, you doing okay? It's almost done." I looked up at him, really looked. His tie was too tight. His hands twitched when he spoke. He wasn't as sure as he sounded. I patted his hand. "I'm fine, Jeremy, just watching." He nodded and walked away, relief in his shoulders. He thought I meant it. The second half went faster. Grace's lawyer echoed what Jeremy said. Nancy whispered too loudly about simplifying inheritance. They all spoke like I was already gone. Then came the final question. Any objection to the transfer of ownership? The judge turned toward me again, her eyes softer this time, waiting. I reached into my bag, unsnapped the clasp, pulled out the paper, thick, slightly yellowed, with Harold's signature beside mine.
My husband and I filed this deed in 1979, I said, voice calm. The property has been under joint ownership since then. Half of it was mine. Still is. Silence. Not courtroom silence, real silence. The kind that falls when the story everyone thought they knew begins to change. Jeremy's mouth opened, then closed. Grace stared straight ahead. Nancy's pearls didn't move, but her hands did. I handed the deed to the clerk. The paper made a soft whisper as it slid across the wood. The judge read it slowly, then looked at me, not with pity, not with surprise, with recognition. "Thank you, Mrs. Joseph," she said. I nodded and folded my hands again. The rest of the proceedings blurred. Voices scrambled to adjust their tone. Lawyers leaned in, whispered, revised. But I just sat there, still, because presence has weight, and mine had just spoken.
The courtroom was cold that morning. Not freezing, just the kind of chill that gets into your elbows and knees if you sit still too long. I wore a soft gray shawl Calvin gave me for Christmas 2 years ago, the last gift he bought before he stopped calling me Mom and started calling me her. I sat near the front, hands folded neatly over my purse. It was the same one I carried to Harold's funeral, black leather, cracking at the seams, but still good, still mine. Lisa stood behind her lawyer, perfect posture, too much perfume. She didn't look at me. "She's confused," she said to the judge, voice gentle, like she was trying not to wake a sleeping child. "She's been ill, Your Honor. We've done our best to take care of her. But this document she's brought in, it doesn't reflect sound mind or memory." I looked down at my folded hands. My nails were short and clean. My rings, what was left of them, sat quiet on my fingers. The gold one with the tiny sapphire, Harold gave me that the day we opened our first bank account together. That was real. That happened. What Lisa forgot, or maybe never knew, was that I'd spent 10 years helping her write every church bulletin and family Christmas letter. I had her voice memorized. I knew the way she turned truth into favor, how she layered concern over control. "She forgets things," Lisa added. "Sometimes she repeats herself." She told our son Jeremy that Harold was still alive. That part was true. I had said that, but not because I forgot he died. I said it because Jeremy was being cruel, and Harold would never have let that happen. The judge looked at me finally. Older man, tired eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "do you understand the document you've submitted today?" I nodded. Then I leaned forward. My voice shook, but not from fear, from holding too much inside for too long. "I do, Your Honor," I said. "It's a deed transfer, signed by my husband before he passed. It was notarized at Taylor & Sons, and it states that the cottage, the one on Pecan Street, remains solely in my name. It was never meant to be added to anyone else's portfolio." Lisa flinched. Not visibly, not to most, but I saw it. A tight pull at her jaw. Her lawyer stood. "With respect, we believe Mrs. Whitaker is misremembering certain events, and—" I held up the receipt. Not the document, the receipt. One yellowed slip of paper from the county clerk's office. The ink had faded, but the signature at the bottom hadn't. It was mine, and I was not confused. You know, when you get older, they stop seeing you. You could sit in the middle of a room full of people you raised, and not one would ask if you needed anything. They think quiet means weak. They think forgetfulness means you're fading. But I haven't faded. I've just stopped explaining. There was a time I would have tried to reason with Lisa, brought her tea, listened to her side, even apologized for hurting her feelings when I asked for the house back. But I learned something over the years. Women like her don't want peace. They want silence. And I'm too old to be quiet when it counts. The judge asked a few more questions. I answered them all, calmly, slowly, like someone who's not afraid to be doubted. When the hearing adjourned, Lisa brushed past me in the aisle, didn't say a word, not even goodbye. I walked out slower than I had come in, but with straighter shoulders. Jeremy was leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't speak either, but I looked at him, really looked, and I saw something that hadn't been there before. Not shame, not regret, but awareness. Maybe that's enough, for now. I stepped into the sun, and the light caught the edges of my hair, what's left of it.
I don't color it anymore. Gray is honest. Gray tells the truth, even when your children won't." They laughed at the old lady, but I outlived their illusions. I outlived their kindness, too. And now, I walk slower, yes, but I walk where I choose.
The courtroom didn't feel as cold that day, or maybe I was just too nervous to notice. There's a strange stillness in the moment before you speak, like the pause between thunder and rain. I stood. My knees betrayed me for a second, the left one catching under its own weight. I gripped the edge of the bench until it passed. "I'd like to speak," I said. The judge looked surprised, raised one brow. "Are you sure, Mrs. Whitaker?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, just for a moment." Lisa's smile had already faded. Jeremy didn't look up, but I saw his jaw tighten. He always did that when he was scared, clenched his teeth like it made him older. I reached into my bag. It took me a second. My fingers don't move as fast as they used to. But I found it, folded carefully into four, yellowed along the creases, the kind of paper that softens from being held too many times. "This," I said, "is a sworn affidavit, signed by Harold Whitaker, dated March 19th, 2002, notarized, witnessed, and filed." You could hear the air change, not louder, just different, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. The judge held out his hand. I stepped forward, slowly. Each step was deliberate, not because I was frail, but because I wanted them to remember it, how the old woman walked to the front without help. When I gave it to him, our fingers brushed. His hand was warm, mine was shaking. He read in silence. The paper crinkled when he turned it over, the sound echoing too loud in that polished room. Then he cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, "this appears to be a signed statement from Mr. Harold Whitaker, acknowledging full intent to leave the property solely to his wife, Evelyn Whitaker, and affirming that no verbal or written agreement was made to gift it to his children or their spouses." Jeremy's face turned a shade I hadn't seen since he was 9, and tried to blame the broken lamp on a cousin who hadn't even been in town. Lisa spoke before she thought. "That's forged." "It isn't," I said gently. "I have the notary's contact. She still lives on Willow Lane. Her granddaughter walks my dog." Lisa blinked. It was the first time she'd looked at me in weeks. "Why didn't you bring this before?" the judge asked. I smiled, not smug, not triumphant, just tired. Because I wanted to believe it wouldn't come to this. I raised those children with love. I thought that counted for something. He nodded slowly, still reading the page like it might explain more than any of us could. "You know, I kept that paper inside an old recipe book, the one with flowers stuck in the spine and a faint smell of cinnamon. No one ever opened it, not even me, for years. I only found it again after Harold died. It was tucked between the peach cobbler and his mother's biscuit recipe. That was Harold, always hiding the important things in plain sight. There's something sacred about written truth. You can scream and shout, but paper holds its ground. It doesn't stammer, doesn't cry. That sheet carried Harold's voice, clear, steady, certain. It said what I couldn't bring myself to, that the house on Pekin Street wasn't up for debate, that it was mine because we built it together, because I held him up when the restaurant failed, because I stayed. Lisa's lawyer asked for time to review it. Of course he did. Jeremy finally looked at me, not with hate, not with love either, just a hollow confusion, like he was seeing a stranger he once called mother. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt finished pretending I owed anyone more than the truth. They always thought I didn't know it was happening, that age makes you dull. But it doesn't. It just makes you quieter. And quieter people, we watch more. The judge said he'd need to verify the statement. I nodded. That was fair. Fair was all I ever asked for. As I returned to my seat, I noticed a smear of ink on my thumb, just a touch of blue, from Harold's signature. He had signed it in the same handwriting he used on every anniversary card, slanted to the right, a little shaky, but full of care. It said, "To Evelyn, this house is yours, always." He adjusted his glasses, held the page like it was glass, like truth could be fragile, even when it was printed in black and white. Then he read it again. No one said a word. Not Lisa, not Jeremy, not even their lawyer. The document made a soft whisper as he laid it down. The courtroom light hit the edge of his bench just right, making the paper gleam faintly, as if even time had decided to pause. He looked at me first, then at Jeremy. "You advised your mother not to speak during the transfer of title?" His voice wasn't angry, just clear, like a bell ringing down the hallway. Jeremy cleared his throat, sat up straighter. I suggested it wasn't necessary, Your Honor. We were under the impression that the property belonged to your wife," the judge finished for him. "Despite no legal documentation indicating such?" Jeremy didn't answer. Lisa glanced at him. The first crack in her carefully built wall. That perfect posture she always carried, the one she practiced in front of mirrors, dipped. Just a little. I didn't need to speak. I'd already done that in Chapter 8. The judge turned the paper over, tapped the notarized seal with the end of his pen. "I've seen many things contested in this room," he said, "but rarely have I seen a clearer example of intent." He looked at me again. "You understand, Mrs. Whitaker, that this document will be filed with today's decision. It may still be contested, but it carries weight." I nodded. My throat was too tight to trust my voice, so I folded my hands in my lap and let the moment be enough. When you've spent your whole life being polite, invisible, agreeable, being heard is like a warm cup of tea after hours in the cold. It doesn't fix everything, but it lets you breathe. Jeremy wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared down at his own shoes, like they might offer him a way out. They used to be scuffed sneakers with laces tied too tight. Now they were polished leather, and still, somehow, too small to carry the weight of what he'd done. The judge leaned back, not tired, just thoughtful. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Family isn't about who speaks the loudest," he said. "It's about who remembers who stood beside them when no one else did." And with that, he stood. Court adjourned. Lisa was already gathering her things before the echo faded. Her face didn't crumble. It hardened. She didn't like to lose, especially not to someone she once called sweet but simple. I didn't watch them leave. I just sat there, breathing, listening to the slow click of heels, the rustle of expensive fabric. Then it was quiet again. And in that silence, I remembered the first time Jeremy brought Lisa home. She was wearing a red scarf, said she was between jobs. I made tea, told her the couch was secondhand but sturdy. She laughed like she owned the place. I remember thinking, she's going to take something from me one day. And I was right. But I also took something back. Not just the deed, not just the right to be heard, but the space to be whole again. Sometimes justice doesn't come loudly. It comes in the form of a question, asked at the right moment by someone who's paid attention. You advised her to be silent? That question stayed with me, because I remembered every time they hushed me at family dinners. Every time I was told, "Don't make this harder, Mom," or "Let's just move on." But silence doesn't heal betrayal. It buries it. And I had carried enough graves inside me. So when the judge said those words, it wasn't just about that courtroom. It was about every quiet ache I'd swallowed. Every Sunday I cooked for people who forgot my birthday. Every holiday where I gave more than I received and still smiled. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked up the drive. The air was heavy, not hot, just thick the way it gets before a storm. And there she was, Clara, leaning on the fence like she'd been waiting a while, but not minding the wait. She had her hair tied up in that messy knot she always wore when she baked, and one of her shoelaces was untied, again. "Hey, Miss Evelyn," she said, like it was any other Tuesday. No courtroom talk, no questions, just her voice, soft, steady, the kind that says, "You're safe now." I smiled. My face hurt from it. I hadn't done it properly in days. "Hey yourself," I said. She held up a small brown bag. "Eggs and cinnamon. Figured you might be low." I was, but that wasn't why I handed her the key. It was old brass, worn smooth from decades of use. I kept it tucked behind the second slat on the east fence post, the one with a knot shaped like a crooked heart. Harold used to keep it there in case I ever locked myself out. I never did, but I always liked knowing it was there. I pulled it out and held it toward her. She looked at it, then at me.
I want you to have it, I said. For the gate. Come by whenever you like. You don't have to knock. Clara blinked. Her eyes always looked like she was on the edge of crying, even when she was laughing, but today they were still, quiet, like mine. She didn't ask what happened, didn't say, I heard, or is it true, or did they really try to take it from you? She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. And I let her. She was warm, and I hadn't been held like that in a long time. Not gently, not without someone wanting something in return. Clara wasn't family by name, but she brought me soup when I had the flu, shoveled the walk without asking, sat with me through half a dozen doctor appointments just because I shouldn't take the bus alone. Sometimes love doesn't come from where you expect. Sometimes it walks up your drive with a bag of cinnamon and knows not to speak when your eyes are red. We sat on the porch for a while. The wood creaked under us. I noticed the nails were rusting again. Something else to tend to. I can paint the steps this weekend, Clara offered. Been meaning to anyway. I nodded. The lilac's coming back, I said. She smiled. It always does. That bush had been cut down so many times over the years, by storms, by careless hands, by me when I got tired of pruning. But still it came back. Not all at once, not as full, but enough. The wind picked up and the bag crinkled between us. She handed it over like it was treasure. Don't forget to eat, she said. I didn't reply. I just rested my hand over hers, where the key now sat. Cool, small, but heavy in the way that meant something. They tried to take the house, but the gate, the garden, the moments that live past the judgment, they're mine to give. And today, I gave one to someone who showed up without being asked.
I sat at the kitchen table when I wrote it. Same table where we once played Monopoly until Jeremy cried and flipped the board. Same spot where I sewed Rebecca's hem the morning of her recital, needle pricking my thumb in the rush. I didn't light a candle or make tea first, no ceremony, just a pen, a legal pad, and the quiet clarity that only comes when you've stopped needing to be liked. The house was still. Even the birds had gone quiet. I started with Jeremy. Not because he was firstborn, but because his name came to mind with the weight of a door closing. To my son Jeremy, I wrote, I leave the framed photo of his wedding, the one he never sent me a thank you note for. I paused, let my hand rest, then continued. It will remind him there was a time I still smiled at the thought of being included. No money, no property, just the picture. Next was Lisa. She's not blood, but she tied herself to our name like ivy, slowly, then all at once, until she thought it belonged to her. To Lisa, I leave the first apron I ever wore in the Whitaker kitchen. She used to laugh at it, called it homely. But it fed her family for 20 years. Let her decide what it means now. Then came Rebecca, my daughter. Oh, she was the soft one once, the one who used to curl beside me in bed after nightmares. To Rebecca, I wrote, I leave my garden journals, every page from every season. She never visited, but I kept writing, just in case she might someday want to know what blooms here. I included a small savings bond, nothing large, just enough for a plane ticket and a week in the cottage, if she ever chooses to come. That was the most grace I could give without lying. And then I wrote a name that wasn't expected. To Clara, I said aloud as I wrote, I leave the deed to the house. Simple, no poetry, no explanation. She wouldn't need one. She brought me groceries when my joints ached, sat through long silences without filling them with pity. She shoveled snow, not because I asked, but because she knew I'd try to do it myself. Some people arrive quietly and become family without asking. She once told me, you deserve to live like someone matters to you, and she made that true. I added a note, handwritten, separate from the will. Clara, this house holds the echoes of too many quiet disappointments and more than a few beautiful mornings. I want you to have it, not because you asked, but because you didn't. Love, Evelyn. I folded it carefully, slid it between the pages. Some might call it cruel, but I didn't write the will out of bitterness. I wrote it like I cooked, carefully, with memory in every layer. You see, inheritance isn't just about money. It's about truth, and truth has a weight, just like silence does.
I remembered the Christmas Jeremy brought a new scarf for Lisa, but nothing for me, not even a card. I remembered when Rebecca stopped calling after I asked if she'd come for Thanksgiving. I remembered how Lisa told the neighbors I was slipping, how no one corrected her. I also remembered Clara showing up on my porch one evening with leftover stew and no expectations, how she said, "You shouldn't have to eat alone." I don't believe in revenge, but I do believe in balance. The lawyer looked at me, eyebrows raised, when he read the will. "You sure about all this, Mrs. Whitaker?" he asked. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. He leaned back, tapped the edge of the desk. "You've written it plainly," he said. "That's the only way I know how," I replied. I left the office lighter than I came in. The wind caught my scarf as I stepped outside, lifted it for a moment like wings. They'll get the will someday, after I'm gone, and maybe they'll be angry. Maybe they'll fight it, but it won't change the truth. You can't collect what you never gave.
The screwdriver slipped once, left a small scratch across the metal. Didn't matter. I kept going. One by one, I pried the screws loose from the nameplate. The Whitakers, Est 1969. I ran my fingers over the letters as I pulled it down. Raised brass, tarnished green around the edges. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but no. My hands were steady. I laid it down beside the porch rail, just above the patch of earth I'd cleared that morning. The dirt was damp, smelled like spring. That plaque had hung there for decades, through storms, renovations, births, deaths. It stayed even when I didn't feel welcome here anymore. It was the last thing Harold ever nailed in himself. I remember him saying, "Might as well let the world know who belongs here." But that was the question, wasn't it? Who belonged here? For years, I thought the name made it so, that our title was enough to tether memory to walls, to keep love anchored in the floors. But names fade. They grow cold in mouths that only speak them when there's money to gain. So I dug a shallow trench and planted 2 rose bushes, white ones. They'll bloom in summer, maybe not this one, but the next. They'll grow where the name used to be, roots where there was once brass. Clara watched me from the steps, arms folded, lips pressed into that quiet smile of hers. She didn't offer to help, not out of laziness, but because she knew I needed to do it myself. That's the difference between comfort and control. "You sure?" she asked gently when I stood and brushed the dirt off my knees. I nodded. They took the name for themselves. Let them keep it. She reached into her pocket, handed me a cool bottle of water, then sat beside me on the porch swing. It creaked a little. Everything does in this house. But I know each sound now. The floorboard in the hall that groans at midnight. The loose shutter outside the bedroom window. The way the pipes hum when I run the tap too long. This house doesn't call out for anyone else anymore. Not Jeremy, not Rebecca, not Lisa with her sharp heels and sharper tongue. It just breathes with me. And that's enough. Inside, I'd already cleared the hallway wall of all the posed portraits. Took down the stiff family photos, the ones with strained smiles and matching sweaters no one wanted to wear. In their place, I pinned up sketches Clara drew. Sunflowers, a kettle, a loaf of bread. I framed one photo, a candid of me and Harold at the county fair, cotton candy in hand, laughing at something I no longer remember. That one felt real. That one gets to stay. I baked that afternoon, peach crumble, just enough for 2, and as it bubbled in the oven, I walked the rooms like I used to when the kids were small and finally asleep. I touched the doorway where Jeremy carved his initials 2 deep. Ran my hand along the windowsill where Rebecca once lined up her rock collection. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt like a woman who had been entrusted with a memory and had finally decided what to do with it. There's no name on the mailbox now, just an empty curve of metal and a vine that's already begun to stretch toward it. Neighbors might not know who lives here, but I do. It's the woman who rose early every morning to make a home, the one who was forgotten and remembered herself anyway, the one who finally stopped waiting for the doorbell to ring with apologies.